Thank you so much, Will. Before I begin, I'd like to acknowledge that through my educational path here in the Bay of Quinte, I have gone to elementary and secondary school in what is now known as Trenton, Ontario, on the land of the Haudenosaunee, the Anishinaabe, and the Huron-Wendat. I also went to school for post-secondary in Walbridge, and I currently reside in what is known as Rossmore, Ontario, which is also on the land of the Anishinaabe and the Huron-Wendat, as well as the Mississaugas. After a difficult year of revolving closures, children need a real education recovery that makes sure that no students fall between the cracks. That means providing students with mental health supports, special education supports, and more individual focus in class. Our education workers need to be supported, and we need to make sure that in-person learning is here to stay. A real education recovery will help drive a strong economic recovery for decades to come. Every dollar we invest in education returns $1.30 to the economy. That means investing in education now is investing in a strong economy tomorrow. I'm excited to welcome the leader of the Ontario Liberal Party, Stephen Del Duca, to discuss our Ontario Recovery Plan. Stephen, I'll pass it to you.
Well, good morning, and thanks very much, Emilie. It is great to see you, albeit through my computer screen, of course. Great to be touring virtually with you in Bay of Quinte this morning. I know how hard you and your team have been working, and as I've said many times in the past, but will repeat this morning, I'm absolutely thrilled that you've stepped forward to be the Ontario Liberal candidate in Bay of Quinte to bring your experience and your energy and your dynamic enthusiasm to our team. And ultimately, because of your hard work, to Queen's Park as a champion for the hardworking families of Bay of Quinte just means the world to me. And I'm thrilled to see you this morning. Thanks so much for giving me this opportunity to be with you in Bay of Quinte, again, albeit virtually. I will also say I'm very much looking forward to being back personally, physically, in person in Bay of Quinte at some point over the summer months, once it's safe and responsible to do so. And of course, this morning, as Emilie said, we are here to talk about publicly funded education in Bay of Quinte and right across Ontario. Now, many on the line this morning will know that my wife and I are raising two daughters. Our older daughter is actually graduating from grade 8 today, and our younger daughter is in grade 4. And like millions of other children and families and education workers across Ontario, the past more than 12 months now has been absolutely brutal. It's been brutal for moms and dads who've had ongoing anxiety, that whiplash feeling or effect of schools opening and closing and having to make last minute plans in many cases because there was no clarity or certainty coming from Doug Ford or his team. Having that anxiety because they were never quite sure, again, moms and dads, if schools were truly safe for their kids. The students themselves, thousands of whom that we've heard have literally fallen out of the system because virtual learning has been tough, and because in many communities, including in Bay of Quinte, ongoing, reliable, high-speed broadband is not necessarily something you can rely upon, making it that much tougher for those who have to deal with virtual learning. And it's been absolutely brutal for our frontline education workers, for teachers, for ECEs, for principals, school board staff and trustees, caretakers, school bus drivers. The list is endless. So we're in a point now in Ontario where considerable effort is required to make sure, not just effort, by the way, investment as well, to make sure that we don't have a repeat of another really tough school year, again, for everybody, our kids, hardworking families of this province, and frontline education workers. And the only way that we're going to make sure that we are ready for a strong start in September is if Doug Ford and his team actually makes the effort, actually consults in a genuine way, gets real feedback and advice from, again, those who actually are in our classrooms, in our schools in Bay of Quinte and beyond. And that kind of consultation, that meaningful partnership, well, that should have already been in place. We know it hasn't been in place. It's something that needs to be urgently addressed right now. Secondly, in the Ontario Liberal Plan for a Safe Start in September, we call it the Ontario Liberal Plan for Education Recovery. We want to make sure that our kids actually get to enjoy this summer, that they get outside, that they get some fresh air, they learn how to be kids again, they have a summer of fun or a summer of play. I think that's going to be so helpful with respect to making sure kids are no longer feeling isolated, no longer dealing with their own mental health to the extent that it's possible, no longer dealing with mental health difficulties, or at least those difficulties are reduced because they get that summer of fun, that summer of play. In our plan, we actually include a $100 million investment to make sure that the tens of thousands of families, both locally in Bay of Quinte and right across this province, who wouldn't otherwise be able to afford or access summer recreation program, have support in order to be able to do so. Next, in our plan, we talk an awful lot about smaller class sizes. This is consistent with where we were as Ontario Liberals last summer, the summer of 2020, when we called for a hard cap of 15 in each of our classrooms, because at that time we wanted students to be physically distanced in order to be safe. Well, in this year's plan for 2021, for September 2021, because we know the vaccination rollout is moving along at a decent pace, and because we know we're at a different stage of the pandemic, we are calling for a cap on class sizes, a hard cap of 20 across the board. Now, Emilie mentioned this in her opening remarks. We want that is the kind of in-person instruction and attention that our teachers and others who work in our classrooms can provide to our kids, which will help to set our kids up for success. Next, I want to talk about special education. Now, prior to the pandemic, Doug Ford was already dealing or implementing a series of cuts that were making it tougher to provide the kind of special education support that we need in our schools. That situation, again, has gotten dramatically worse during the pandemic. So the Ontario Liberal Plan for Education Recovery includes an investment to hire 5,000 new special education professionals. And you think about that, that's more than one new special education professional per school in Ontario. That additional support will help make sure, again, that those children that have unique and special needs, in particular, unique and special needs that might have been exacerbated during this pandemic, get more in-person support, get the kind of support they need. So again, they are set up for success as well. A second ago, when I talked about the summer months, the summer weeks that we have just in front of us, school year is about to end all across Ontario, I talked about mental health challenges. Now, look, we know throughout this pandemic, regardless of where you live in the province and regardless of your age, mental health challenges we know are off the charts in terms of people feeling isolated from friends and family, people going through such a tough time, tragic loss of life in some families, far too many families, and also a loss of livelihoods, loss of businesses. It's just been brutally tough. So we know our kids are not immune to those mental health challenges. The Ontario Liberal Plan for Education Recovery would include an investment so that 1,000 new mental health professionals would be available across the province to go into our schools, into our classrooms, and help our kids recover or at least deal constructively with the challenges that they're facing. Next, I want to talk about, at a fundamental level, the issue of in-person versus virtual. Now, I've watched, as my wife and I have both watched our daughters really closely this year, and I will tell you, despite the best efforts of a school system that had to transition under very difficult circumstances more than once throughout this past school year, that virtual learning is not an ideal scenario for anyone. And I'm here to tell you, as well as a dad, that nothing should ever or will ever replace the effectiveness of in-person, safe and healthy instruction in a classroom where the class size is capped, where the educator, the teacher, the support staff in that classroom, in that school, are motivated and respected and honored. That's the kind of system that I want for my kids and for your kids as well. Now, Doug Ford and his team have talked about the desire they have to create an ongoing parallel publicly funded education system that will be virtual, to give parents the option, to give families the option forever and ever and ever. I think that's a mistake. I think that's actually setting the kids and the entire system up for long-term failure. And I don't want to see that. I don't want to see that. I say that even though Ontario Liberals do recognize that we are not all the way through to the other side of this pandemic just yet, though we're much closer to the end of this, I think, I believe, I hope, than we are at the beginning. And so for this coming school year and this coming school year only, our plan for education recovery includes a virtual option for those parents who still feel uncomfortable about sending their kids back to school in person come September. But once we are through this pandemic, I believe that our provincial government, and if Ontario Liberals are successful and we win next year and we get the honor of governing this province, we will move heaven and earth to create an in-person publicly funded school system that has the right supports, that has the right investment, and again, that sets everybody in this province up for opportunity and for success. And lastly, I want to talk about the bricks and mortar, the physical state of good repair in our schools. We've heard from parents right across Ontario about the need to have a stronger sense of ventilation, whether windows are working or not. That's one of the reasons that our long-term plan for education includes $8 billion in new funding over 5 years for a state of good repair in schools. But in the meantime, over these summer weeks that we have just in front of us, we believe that the provincial government should match the federal investment just over $500 million to make sure that schools in Bay of Quinte and beyond have proper air quality and safe drinking water so that we know our kids can be in a school that is physically top-notch for them. All of this entire plan, which is comprehensive and thoughtful and responsible, will set our kids, our educators, and everyone else who works in the education system up for success. This is good for Ontario's families. It's really good for our economy, and it's good for all of us. And with that, I'd be happy to take any questions you might have.
Okay, just a reminder to all the reporters on the line, if you just please raise your hand using the Zoom function or write to the chat with your name and your outlet name, I will call on you for a question. Okay, first question is Luke Hendry from The Intelligencer.
Hi there, I hope you can hear me.
Yeah, we can hear you.
Okay, great. Good morning, everyone. Just wanted to ask about the cap on classrooms. We know that adding space in schools can be quite difficult, and sometimes require portables and that sort of thing. How does the party propose to do this, and how would you pay for that?
Well, so it's a great question. I will tell you that in our plan, one thing I didn't mention because I was only highlighting some of the elements was that in our plan, we include, I think it's $18 million to help support outdoor learning in those parts of the province where it works, when it works. In the plan that we put forward in the summer of 2020 to have last school year be a bit more, I guess, easier to deal with for families across the province, we also called for the creation of thousands of new spaces. I stand by that commitment from the summer of 2020. Here's what I know. Over the past year, I've had the chance to do about 6 or 7 different education partner roundtables through Zoom. And there have been anywhere from 55 to 60 women and men who represent everybody in publicly funded education who've come consistently onto those calls. They've all wanted to be helpful. They've all understood from the very beginning that things like finding creative spaces, whether that's in public libraries, recreation centers, community centers, in addition to schools, perhaps even in using portables for the short term, that we have to look for new spaces creatively in order to be able to bring down class sizes. The challenge that I have is that despite our calls more than a year ago for that kind of move, despite the fact that many, including Ontario Liberals, have been consistently calling on Doug Ford to have a plan ready to go. Because, when you lead a province, you have to be able to walk and chew gum at the same time. You have to figure that publicly funded education is a profoundly important responsibility and you want to get it right. That work hasn't occurred. Even taking a simple inventory of what spaces might be available in various communities, again, something I called for a year ago, hasn't taken place. That work needs to begin right now, because I know it hasn't started. It needs to begin right now. You might be in Trenton, you might be somewhere else in Bay of Quinte. Different communities will have different things available to help support this, but you got to do the actual work. You got to have the interest in making the effort and making the investment to deliver the outcome. The bottom line is capping class sizes at 20 will help set our kids up for success. And so you need to move heaven and earth. It's an all hands on deck moment to get there. In terms of the cost, Emilie off the top this morning talked about how important this is to our economy. Here's what we know from the Conference Board of Canada from a couple of years ago, when they did an in-depth study of education investments. We know that for every $1 you invest effectively in publicly funded education, that returns $1.30 to the provincial economy. When you get that kind of return to the provincial economy, government revenues go up, and that helps to support the investment needed in this case.
Follow up.
Thank you. And just wondering if you've heard anything specific from folks in Bay of Quinte. Are there any riding specific challenges or needs that you've heard?
Well, certainly, Emily, and I'll ask Emily to perhaps weigh in when I'm done my short answer on this. Emily and I have spoken. We continue to talk, and I know she's talking to the rest of our policy team about what she's seeing and hearing on the ground in Bay of Quinte, about what, and all of that information coming from Emily and the rest of our candidates across Eastern Ontario and right across this province has been fed into the policy that we're here to talk about. But Emily, perhaps if you could share some of what you're hearing from the hardworking families of Bay of Quinte, that would be awesome.
Yes, thank you so much, Stephen. And thank you for the question, Luke. I think first and foremost, one of the biggest things that I'm seeing or that I notice is just when I go to get my COVID swab or go to get a COVID test, Quinte Secondary is the location for that. And we've seen, unfortunately, some school closures or some changes in our infrastructure that I would love to see us make an inventory. To Stephen's point, I was thrilled that you made that comment, Stephen, because I think it's so important, and it's been such a long time since we've done this simple task of making an inventory of what's available in the Bay of Quinte. And I know we have a lot of space that we aren't utilizing, and we also have a lot of outdoor space in the post-secondary side of things. For example, I'm so excited that Loyalist College just finalized their Indigenous outdoor education space, and they were just awarded a national prize, if I'm not mistaken. I'd love to see more institutions creating these outdoor spaces, to Stephen's point. And the last thing I'll say is I'm really excited to work with our school boards as well. I know our school board here in Belleville, we just appointed a new director, and I'm really excited to work with her as well as the entire team and really just have these conversations to make sure that we can reduce those class sizes and get back to a mental optimal state.
Thanks, Emily.
Okay, the next question is from Natasha McDonald Dupuis from Radio Canada.
Hello.
Good morning.
Hi. Good morning. I have a question in French for Emilie. Bonjour, Madame Leneveu. J'aimerais ça vous entendre en français par rapport à vos inquiétudes là, pour le mode d'enseignement qui va être permis là, pour la rentrée scolaire en septembre. Par exemple, on sait que l'an dernier, le modèle hybride avait fait en sorte qu'il y avait des centaines d'élèves qui avaient été privés d'immersion française parce qu'il n'y avait pas assez de profs pour enseigner les deux modèles. Donc, si vous pouvez parler de ça ou de vos inquiétudes en général par rapport à ça, ça serait apprécié.
Oui, absolument. Puis merci beaucoup pour la question, surtout en français. Premièrement, je pense que, comme Stephen a dit, le bien-être de nos élèves et nos enfants, ça doit être lié directement à notre apprentissage. Quand on parle de notre bien-être, c'est pas juste le bien-être physique des enfants, c'est la santé mentale. Puis pour moi, la santé mentale, c'est vraiment numéro un. Puis par rapport à la taille des classes ou le cap qu'on veut avoir, c'est vraiment une réduction des classes avec un plafond de 20 étudiants. Et pour moi, je pense vraiment que la plupart des inquiétudes liées à la santé mentale vont vraiment, j'espère en tout cas, vont vraiment être réduits en réduisant les tailles des classes. Fait que, encore une fois, pour moi, comme Stephen a dit, le bien-être des élèves et l'apprentissage doit être lié étroitement. Et encore une fois, je suis vraiment excitée de faire l'inventaire de nos classes, puis faire l'inventaire de tout l'espace qu'on a dans les classes, à l'extérieur, et vraiment faire le shift, puis faire le pivot pour éventuellement ne pas être en ligne et ne pas être virtuel et vraiment être en classe ensemble, à une distance ou éventuellement plus une distance quand on a la chance pré ou post-COVID, si tu veux. Mais pour l'instant, le modèle hybride pour septembre et encore une fois, une réduction des classes, je pense que ça va vraiment aider les enfants côté santé mentale. Merci pour la question.
Follow-up?
No follow-up. Merci, Emilie.
Pas de problème, merci.
Okay, that's all the questions on the line. Thank you.
Thanks, everyone. Take care.